chapter which will be very important from prelims point of view. Keep that in mind, because there are too many data in it. Plus I will be giving you some latest data also, so that there is no confusion on any account. तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं, and let's start talking on chapters on external sector. तो सर्वे शुरू में वर्ल्ड एक्सपीरियंस के ऊपर शुरू करते हैं. They say that due to political and economic uncertainty, there is difficulty, geopolitical conflicts like the wars, fragmentation, China, USA and so on, and climate events. So these are global challenges to trade. और IMF ने बोला कि variability बहुत high है, lot of uncertainty and lot of risk, and then the financing cost rises, everybody is uncertain, interest rates will be higher, insurance rates will be higher. These are challenges to global trade. So we say indicators to monitor global risks. So one is geopolitical risk index, which tracks adverse events, trade policy uncertainty, which is through articles mentioning trade policy uncertainty, global policy economic uncertainty index, and RBI has developed its own policy uncertainty index specific to India using Google Trends. तुम बस इन index का नाम याद रख लोगे, that will be sufficient for us. Of course, when we look at global trade dynamics, we have seen some particular trade disruptions. अब ये particular trade disruptions कहाँ हैं आप देखिए. These particular trade disruptions like Red Sea, यहाँ पे disruption है. Particular trade disruption like Panama Canal in the past, Suez Canal, ये कुछ routes हैं जो disturb हो गए हैं, and that is creating its own challenge for the global system. So there are particular key routes, and that results in uncertainty, slowing the trade, because everybody now has to take a longer route. Increased protectionism, countries are increasing their import duty, and therefore the global supply chains are shifting, like we see a China +1. We also see that Russians are being replaced by Europeans as their suppliers of fuel. So the supply chains globally are also showing a shifting trend. Then of course we see that if we see the friend shoring and near shoring has come up. Friend shoring matlab outsource business to friendly countries. अपने बिजनेस को वहां भेजिए जहां के देश आपके दोस्त हों. अपना बिजनेस, जैसे मान लीजिए मैं टोयोटा कंपनी हूं, मुझे अपने कार के लिए इंजन बनाना है, तो अगर मैं चाइना में बना रहा हूं और जापान और चाइना के बीच में रिलेशन अच्छे नहीं है, तो फ्रेंड शोरिंग नहीं हो पाई है. तो फ्रेंड शोरिंग का मतलब, से आई एम जापानीज कंपनी, आई एम फ्रेंडली टू इंडिया, आई शिफ्ट माई इंजन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग टू India, and that I am outsourcing, and they can then send it back to me. And then of course there is near shoring, that is outsource business to countries nearby, ताकि uncertainty खत्म हो. जैसे अमेरिका ने मेक्सिको में आउटसोर्स कर दिया, अमेरिका ने कनाडा को आउटसोर्स किया था. India is trying to outsource it to countries nearby it, like some business has been outsourced to certain East Asian economy. Some East Asian economies are outsourcing it to India. So that outsourcing is called near shoring. So we have friend shoring and near shoring, where trade is increasingly aligning with geopolitical alliances. That geopolitically, if you are friendly, if you are trading with each other, your trade aligns with that. Then of course, if we see, we have major economies shifting dependencies. So the EU and the US reduced reliance on China and Russia. That is the first thing that happened. That now EU and US are reducing their reliance on China and Russia and Vietnam have deepened ties with China. So the dependencies are shifting. All countries are moving in that direction. तो ये देखा जा रहा है कि जो नॉन टैरिफ मेजर्स हैं, जहां आप टैरिफ नहीं लगा रहे लेकिन दूसरे कानून लगा रहे हैं, जैसे कार्बन बॉर्डर एडजस्टमेंट मैनेजमेंट टैक्स जो यूरोपियन यूनियन ने लगाया. सो यू आर नॉट इम्पोजिंग टैरिफ, यू आर इम्पोजिंग नॉन टैरिफ मेजर्स, एंड दे आर अफेक्टिंग ओवर 30% ऑफ प्रोडक्ट्स एंड नियरली 70% ऑफ global trade. They are affecting 30% of products and nearly 70% of global trade. So now it's not only tariff barriers which are playing a role, they are also the non-tariff barriers which are playing their own role. So this is also something we need to take care of. Then of course, when we look at global trade performance, the survey says that the year-on-year increase is 3.5% in exports and 3% in imports of goods, and 7.9% and 6.7% for services. So that is what is globally happening. Trade show growth in developing countries exceeded of developed countries, and East Asia was not doing very great. Untapped ने ये कहा है that growth trade, global trade will hit a record USD 33 trillion in 2024. But this is under risk after Trump's tariff. IMF has reduced its trade forecast by almost 0.6%. UNCTAD has reduced its growth forecast by 1%. So global trade, people were very optimistic, but now everybody is thinking it might just be in danger because of the possibility of Trump's tariff and China's retaliation, other countries becoming susceptible. That can also be a factor. Then of course, what are these tariff policies? तो एक तो है कि फ्री ट्रेड और इन्वेस्टमेंट एग्रीमेंट को बूस्ट करने के लिए रीजनल ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट्स बहुत सारे साइन हुए एंड दे इंक्रीज्ड फ्रॉम 22 in 1990 to 369 by August 2024. So massively growing RTAs. But इसका एक और कारण था, when countries sign regional trade agreements with each other, they don't have to abide by the most favored nation status of WTO. So अगर आप bilaterally किसी को benefit देते हैं तो WTO के most favored nation status के classification के हिसाब से आपको वो benefit सभी countries को देना पड़ेगा. तो countries क्या करती हैं? They don't do it bilaterally. They sign regional trade agreements to make sure that they come out of the MFN clause. So that is also a reason why RTAs have increased by such an extent. But ये देखा गया कि पिछले 20 सालों में जबरदस्त decline हुआ है tariffs में. Like India's average tariff dropped from 48.9% in 2000 to 17.3% in 2024. China's tariff dropped from 16 to 8%. And globally we see preferential tariffs have declined. Also, India is balancing it between domestic priorities with global integration. कि जिन sectors में हम already strong हैं, वहाँ हमने tariff कम होने दिया. जहाँ हम newly developed industries बना रहे हैं, वहाँ हमने फिर भी tariffs रखे हैं. So in automobile, the tariffs are high. In textile, the tariffs are low. That kind of business India has been trying to achieve. Then of course, we said tariffs vary by sector, aiming to protect sensitive industries, as I told you. Also ongoing efforts to rationalize tariff. इसमें ध्यान रखिएगा आप, पिछले 2 बजट में India has 23 different tariff lines. In the last two budgets, on 15 of these tariff lines, the tariffs have been considerably reduced. In the last 2 budgets, 24 के जुलाई के बजट में और 25 के फरवरी के बजट को अगर देखें, then out of 23 tariff lines that India has, tariff line का मतलब बड़े commodities पे जो tariff लगते हैं, उनमें से 15 पे tariffs गवर्नमेंट ने reduce कर दिया है significantly. So the idea is to make sure that India becomes a destination for global trade. और मेजर टैरिफ्स रिड्यूस किए जा रहे हैं ऑन रॉ मटेरियल टू सेव इंडिया फ्रॉम इन्वर्टेड ड्यूटी स्ट्रक्चर. Inverted duty structure क्या हुआ? That when we choose to impose a lot of tax on raw material and less import duty on finished goods, तो इसका नुकसान क्या होता है? Then people choose not to produce or manufacture in India. They rather import the finished goods and do not purchase the raw material and manufacture in India. तो अब हमने ट्राई करना शुरू किया है that let's reduce the tariff on raw material so that raw materials become cheaper and then we can use them to produce the finished goods in India rather than depending on foreign suppliers. So this is a good decision for Make in India that government has taken in the last couple of budgets. Then of course tariff is an industrial policy tool. After Trump's tariff, economic survey mind you Trump tariff से पहले आया था, but सबको अंदेशा था कि Trump अब tariff लगाएंगे. तो historically ये देखा गया है that Western Europe and North America have used tariffs to make sure that internal markets can be supported. Alongside that, internal free markets क्या किया उन्होंने ताकि उनको डेवलपमेंट मिले? इंटरनल मार्केट्स को फ्री किया, मतलब इंटरनल टैक्सेस कम किए, मोबिलिटी आसान की, उसके साथ साथ स्टेबल बैंकिंग सिस्टम बनाया, यूनिवर्सल एजुकेशन दिया लोगों को, अपने इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी अच्छे किए. तो ये अगर आप करेंगे और तब टैरिफ लगाएंगे तो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन होगा. अगर ये भी नहीं करेंगे और टैरिफ लगाते रहेंगे तो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन भी नहीं होगा और देश में चीजें भी महंगी हो जाएंगी. So neither will you get industrialization and then things will become costlier in the country. Of course, we see that USA imposed 45% tariff on manufactured goods between 1870 to 1913. Trump is now making it much worse, but let's wait and watch what he does over there. So we see that in modern industrial system, people impose tariff, export subsidies to support their own industries. But if we see the industrialization of the world between 1945 to 1991 and industrialization of the world between 1991 to 2021, we will see that industrialization has happened at double the rate in the last 30 years compared to the previous 45 years. Kyun? Why did this happen? A big reason was tariffs going down, global supply chains being established, so cost of production came down, and due to that we saw a lot of inventions, innovations. So ideally it should be suggested that lower tariffs help the world, but of course individually countries can have their own policies to just make sure that they have lesser tariff and they can kind of make sure that they are increasing their output and promising their own people jobs. But ये देखा गया है कि जब tariffs कम हुए हैं तो jobs भी बढ़े हैं, ज़्यादा नए तरह के businesses भी बढ़े हैं. ये आप ध्यान रखेंगे, economic data बताता है. It's not that this is just theoretical, data wise. Then of course, if we see next, we saw Korea in 1970 did this strategy of using temporary tariff. Koreans ने क्या किया, 10 companies ली और उनको काइबॉल्स का खिताब दे दिया. They gave this designation of काइबॉल्स to 10 companies, and they said that we will protect you for 10 years by increasing import tariff, but in these 10 years you will have to become sufficiently efficient to be able to export. तो अगर आप 10 साल में एक्सपोर्टर बन गए तब तो हम आपको प्रोटेक्शन देंगे, अगर नहीं बने तो आपकी जगह कोई और कंपनी आ जाएगी. And that created some global winners like like Samsung, LG, Hyundai. But remember, that cannot be done today, because unlike 70s, there is no Cold War. Unlike 70s, the world is now used to more free trade, and there is a WTO where fines can be imposed. So there was effective industrial policy with incentives and performance requirements, जो मैं आपको कहानी सुना रहा था, जो साउथ कोरिया ने किया था. But remember, tariffs alone are not sufficient. It lies in their calibrated integration, and how do you integrate with the border policy? That's very important. तो tariff लगा के थोड़ा बहुत शायद आप अपने benefits ला सकते हैं, but without tariff there is one more challenge that we need to overcome, which is global policy tools have to be in picture. ये जरूरी है कि आपके global policy system भी वो support कर रहा हो. Now if we look at non-tariff measures, हमने ये देखा that after COVID pandemic 26,000 global trade and investment restrictions have been imposed by countries all over the world. Industrial goals के लिए, climate policy goals के लिए. तो टेक्निकल बैरियर्स टू ट्रेड लगाए गए कि अगर आप खराब क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट यूज करेंगे हम नहीं उसको यूज करेंगे, अगर आप केमिकल फर्टिलाइजर्स यूज करेंगे तो हम आपका एग्रीकल्चरल गुड नहीं खरीदेंगे, अगर आप वल्कनाइज्ड रबर यूज करेंगे तो आपका प्रोडक्ट नहीं खरीदेंगे. ऑल दीज थिंग्स वर ब्रॉट इन फॉर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, एग्रीकल्चर, नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज. तो अंकटैड यूनेस्कैप ने भी ये बताया दैट climate related non-tariff measures make up to just 12.6% of measures, but they impact 26% of global trade. So that is like say carbon border adjustment management tax. So they have become pretty prominent globally. Now we see that this results in, now if you build this non-tariff measures and they are focusing on good quality and they are focusing on good measurements, then it can build consumers' trust, and that might help higher standards of growth. Also it can raise compliance information, procedural costs, and that will mean that smaller exporters of low income countries will be negatively affected. क्योंकि अगर मैं small exporter हूँ, एक MSME हूँ इंडिया में, और आपने मुझ पे procedures का cost डाल दिया, certification का cost डाल दिया, testing का cost डाल दिया, I will automatically become non-competitive compared to the larger producers of the developed countries. Also, non-tariff measures are granular. ये अंदर छिपे हुए होते हैं, इनको broadly detect करना बहुत मुश्किल होता है, और ये FDI को influence करेंगे क्योंकि फर्म्स उसी कंट्री में इन्वेस्ट करेंगे जहां पे कॉस्टली नॉन टैरिफ मेजर्स ना लगे, जहां उन्हें आराम से प्रोडक्शन करने को मिले. सो इन दैट केस इट मे एनकरेज FDI इनटू मार्केट्स विद हाई ट्रेड बैरियर्स. इफ नॉन टैरिफ मेजर्स, ये प्रीलिम्स के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से याद रखोगे, मोर नॉन टैरिफ मेजर्स में एनकरेज FDI इनटू markets with high trade barriers. So measures like intellectual property, local content rules, all these are technical barrier and technical barrier to trade are particularly impactful. So that is why it is very important that we focus on making sure that things like carbon border adjustment mechanism, deforestation regulation are managed well, because otherwise India, China, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, these countries will be affected adversely. और अगर मुझसे पूछिए तो कहीं ना कहीं मुझे ये एक प्लॉय लगता है, एक मेथड लगता है कि कैसे हमारे यहाँ के एक्सपोर्ट्स को डिस्करेज किया जा सके. I think it's a method there. अब जैसे अगर यूरोप CBAM लगाएगा, कार्बन बॉर्डर एडजस्टमेंट टैक्स या फिर डिफॉरेस्टेशन रूल्स, तो उस ये 2026 से इफेक्टिव होंगे। तो इस केस में to equalize carbon costs between domestic and imported goods, it will mean Indian iron and steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers पर इसलिए afford कर पा रहे हैं क्योंकि आपने developing countries को खूब सारा लूटा है in the past. So that is also something we should not forget, you know. So if we go further, that is what is the exposure. मैंने तुम्हें एक table दिया है, उसे देख लेना. That iron and steel it has widened from 69.7 billion to 79.5 billion. Finally, you know, the imports India did this year has been 955 billion. 194 billion has been services import and 761 billion has been goods import. So overall, India ended with a 135 billion trade deficit. You know, 135 billion trade deficit. So this is important. Please keep that in mind, that you know these numbers you should know based on the current affairs. All right, the numbers that you are seeing here are based on the current affairs thing. ये मैंने आपको update कर दिया. Then merchandise exports have finally grown at 0.4% year on year. Commodity exports. Non-petroleum exports have grown actually at 8%, while petroleum exports have gone negative. Electronic goods and engineering goods are the major performers, along with pharmaceuticals and textiles. Merchandise imports grew by 5.2%. Actually, they ended up growing by 6%. And as I told you, the non-oil, non-gold imports have grown comparatively more. Capital goods, electronics imports have been higher. So this is the data that survey gives you, but I've given you the latest data, so you don't have to worry. Now, India's textile sector, they have done a workout on that India's textile sector is a key pillar of the economy, rooted in cultural heritage and craftsmanship. Now, textile contributes 2.3% to GDP, 13% to industrial production, and 12% to exports. It employs 45 million people. Mind you, it is one of the largest employers in India after agriculture and construction. अगर एग्रीकल्चर को ले लें और कंस्ट्रक्शन को ले लें तो तीसरे नंबर पे टेक्सटाइल सेक्टर आएगा, और इंडस्ट्रीज में सबसे बड़ा एम्प्लॉयर टेक्सटाइल है, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में इट्स द बिगेस्ट एम्प्लॉयर, एंड इट हैज 80% कैपेसिटी इन MSME clusters. So now we see that in 2023 India exported 34 billion in textiles. In 2024 it came down to 32 billion in textiles actually. 2025 it has again gone up to 34 billion in textiles. So in textile, अगर सवाल आए prelims में तो ध्यान रखोगे, approximately $34 billion exports in textile. Semi-finished materials are 34%, finished non-apparel goods are 30%. So that is how textile has been created. Now further, if we see the key export markets are Europe and US, 66% for apparel, 58% for non-apparel, 12% for raw material. And UK and UAE take 8 and 7% also, but Europe and European Union and US are the major exporters there. India is a less player in the global market because Chinese control 30%. That's a massive control of global textile market. और हम क्यों कम कंट्रोल करते हैं, सर्वे ये बात नहीं बताते खुलकर. हमारा सबसे बड़ा कारण है हमारी खराब ऑफिशियल सिस्टम, जिसने खराब रूल बना रखे हैं, आउटडेटेड रूल्स हैं, मल्टीपल परमिशंस हैं, स्केलिंग अप ऑफ MSME अलाउ नहीं करते ठीक से, घूस खाते हैं बहुत ज़्यादा, उसके वजह से हमारा टेक्सटाइल सफ़र करता है. द इंडस्ट्री इज़ नॉट डूइंग बैडली, द गवर्नमेंट इज़ लेटिंग इट डाउन. सो अगर हम करप्शन कम करें, थोड़े अफसर लोग घूस खाना कम कर दें, लालच कम करें, भारत को लूटना कम करें, अगर हम ये पक्का करें कि हमारे सेक्टर्स में प्रमोशनल एवेन्यूज हैं, MSME को स्केल अप करने का प्रोविजन है, और अगर हम पक्का करें कि हम बेटर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर दे रहे हैं, बेटर क्वालिटी लेबर दे रहे हैं, नो रीजन व्हाई इंडिया कैन नॉट compete with China in textile. But unfortunately there is a lot of corruption and a lot of complacency in our textile belts, and this is the reason why textile doesn't do well. I needed you to know this because unfortunately the government papers don't become vocal on it. Now, coming back to this, see, even Bangladesh has 4 times more share than us, and Vietnam has 3 times more share than us. So we should become careful as to where are we losing out. Now, they say challenges kya hain, shifts and opportunities. So India's textile production is decentralized. So that means small scale dominates, with processes spanning multiple states and SMEs. Like cotton is grown in Gujarat and MP, spun in Tamil Nadu, weaved in Maharashtra and Gujarat. Now, why does this happen? Because we have not tried to collate all the things at one place and give the benefits. Now, PM Mitra, agar hum lagaye theek se scheme, it can be a game changer, no doubt. But we will have to make sure that scheme picks up and we do things. Of course, the fragmented value chain raises production and logistics cost, and that makes us reduced compared to our competitors. And exporters face complex regulations like detailed documentation. ये corruption का कारण बनता है. Pre-shipment inspections, ये भी corruption का कारण बनता है. For every square centimeter of fabric, button and zippers used. Unnecessary pre-91 rules still continuing. इनको हटा दें, थोड़ा सा करप्शन कम खत्म करने की कोशिश करें, रूल्स को बेहतर बनाएं. टेक्सटाइल कैन बी अ विनिंग सेक्टर. सेम विथ फुटवेयर, सेम विथ फर्नीचर, सेम विथ टॉयज, एंड दे आर ऑल लेबर इंटेंसिव सेक्टर्स. मल्टीपल जॉब्स कैन बी क्रिएटेड इन इंडिया एंड वी वोंट हैव टू वरी अबाउट AI. But somebody has to explain this to the government in detail. Of course, China and Vietnam with fiber to fashion firms offer lower costs and all, but we can do it too, provided we improve ourselves. So somebody should make the babus read economic survey. If they can read economic survey, maybe they can grow up and realize how they are restricting India's growth because of their lack of knowledge of economics. Now, India's textile exports faces high tariffs. This can go away if India can negotiate a trade deal with USA. Let's not forget Koreans have a trade deal with USA. Vietnam has a trade deal with USA on this. So if we can have a trade deal with USA, our tariffs will be reduced. The problem will be sustainable sourcing because European Union regulations will come in for our SMEs. Then of course, if we see the evolving trends, we see that world is moving towards man-made fiber, polyester and all, athleisure, technical textiles, and India is still stuck in the zone of cotton textile and all. So I think India can grow up there and do some man-made fiber-based things. So man-made fiber accounts for 77% of global fiber, while India's share is only 9.2%. So what should India do? India should vertically integrate man-made fiber production. That is, connect raw material sources to finished goods. That is vertically integrating. Invest in R&D and embrace sustainable practices. If India can do that, we can do far better. See, India produces a lot of cotton market, but look at the declining trend of cotton globally, and that's where India also suffers. Now, India has given a PLI scheme with 10,000 crore for investment and capacity creation in textile. India has done that, and we have National Technical Textile Mission which supports R&D. The PM Mitra Parks, we have only one PM Mitra Park functional at the moment in Tamil Nadu. That is where we have to get speeded up. We have planned 7 PM Mitra Parks all over India, UP, Maharashtra, everywhere, Telangana. So if we can speed up PM Mitra Parks, they're plug and play places. तुम्हारे current affair class में मैं तुम्हें सिखा रहा था. I hope you would recall. So if India can plug up on that PM Mitra, we can do far better. Also, there is a scheme for rebate of state and central taxes and levies to reduce export costs. And of course, the FTAs will help. So India is taking steps, but as I told you, corruption कम करना पड़ेगा, rules आसान बनाने पड़ेंगे, FTAs साइन करने पड़ेंगे, और मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंटली जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफिसर्स जिनको समझ नहीं है 2 पैसे की इंडस्ट्री की, उनको इंटरफेरेंस से रोकना पड़ेगा. ये हमारा एक बहुत ज़्यादा एक रेस्ट्रिक्टिव फैक्टर है. मैं स्ट्रांगली नॉर्मली ऐसी बात नहीं करता हूं, बट ये समझ लीजिए ये बहुत ही फ्रस्ट्रेटिंग फैक्टर है इंडिया के लिए कि जिनको 2 पैसे की समझ नहीं कि ट्रेड कैसे होता है, एक्सपोर्ट कैसे होता है, नियम कैसे बनाने चाहिए, वो बैठ के नियम बना रहे हैं चाय की चुस्की लेते हुए गोल्फ क्लब में बैठकर. तो ये समथिंग अगर हम चेंज करें और एक्सपर्ट्स को लाएं, उनकी बातें सुने कि वो क्या बोल रहे हैं और उस हिसाब से पॉलिसी बनाएं. टेक्सटाइल, फर्नीचर, लेदर गुड्स, फूड प्रोसेसिंग, apparel, these are all big industrial sectors to grow by. Then of course we talk about strategic tailwinds, the growing. ये tailwinds क्या हैं जो हमें थोड़े नुकसान पहुंचा रहे हैं. जैसे growing interest from global buyers over 40, so थोड़े benefit दे रहे हैं, I'm sorry, over 40% of procurement officers plan to increase sourcing from India. Bangladesh's disturbance is helping India. China +1 is helping India. इसीलिए मैं फिर कहूँगा, there are some wonderful officers in the government who have the brain. अगर वो लोग useful हो जाएं और अपना काम करने लग जाएं इस क्षेत्र में, and if government can become a little conscious and push those officers, hopefully PM Mitra and ROSCTL can do that work, then we can have a very good forward measurement in textile. And there is rising demand for long-term sourcing partnerships coming from many places. So what is the way forward? Reduce production and regulatory costs, expand man-made fiber capabilities, enhance quality and sustainability standard, and simplify export procedures. अगर ये 4 काम हम कर दें तो अपने आप हमारा टेक्सटाइल एक्सपोर्ट भी चाइनीज को मैच करेगा, बांग्लादेश या वियतनाम तो आप छोड़िए. Between 94 and 22, India has diversified the export basket, a market leader in product categories like shipping vessels and iron and steel alloys. In fiscal year 25, India's exports expanded despite global challenges, tapping into new and promising markets. That's true, without any doubt. India has done well, even in a global challenging situation. Now we look at analysis of 20 principal commodities with over 100 million in export values. So we see that optical items where USD 16.6 billion was exported to 14 new markets. So diversification of trade market is happening, which is a good thing. Similarly, cranes, lifts and winches, the engineering goods, USD 12.23 million to 12 new markets. ये बहुत छोटे शुरुआत है. We are still in millions, Chinese billions में है. तो छोटा शुरुआत है, बट अच्छा शुरुआत है. कम से कम हम यहाँ ग्रोथ कर रहे हैं. Office equipment, medical scientific instruments, surgicals, every place new markets are being targeted, which is very good, so that we can reduce our dependence on Europe and America. Of course, India is trying to adapt itself, diversify itself to support long-term economic growth. So then we come to services trade. Now we see service sector growth expanded by 11.6% of first 9 months of 25. Overall in 25, expanded by 12%. So service trade overall has done very well for itself. And we see that service trade, we have a surplus also. Our exports are much higher than our imports. So net services receipt is positive, net goods receipts is negative. Commodity में वो negative है, services में वो positive है. Now we see India's global share in service export has doubled from 1.9% to 4.3%. And we see telecom, computer and information services are rising. Other business services by professional consultancies rising. Construction services is rising. And cultural and recreational services, especially, Indian movies are being watched a lot abroad. So Bahubali collecting more than 100 crore in China. That was a big deal. Similarly, Jawan collecting more than 100 crore in USA. So there have been success stories of Indian movies doing very well, which is giving growth over here that we are getting through. Then, of course, if we see travel, we are still not doing good. Tourism is something where in last 2 budgets we have talked a lot. Hopefully government should push tourism a little better. वहाँ पर भी अगर हम नियम, कानून, वीज़ा, रेगुलेशन इनको थोड़ा easy कर दें, कस्टम्स ऑफिस में घूस मांगना कम कर दें, तो मुझे लगता है हम थोड़ा बेहतर कर पाएंगे. Again, corruption is playing a bad role there also. Then of course, we see transport is again not doing that great. Financial services are below global average. Again, insurance is a sector where we can do well. Hopefully with 100% opening up of insurance sector, we can do much better than what we did earlier. Now, thankfully, India's dominance is there in IT and business, but we have a lot of untapped potential in travel, transport and finance. So if we can focus on skill development, infrastructure like air connectivity, road connectivity improved, tourism will be boosted, and policy support, that is ease of entering India, ease of leaving India, ease of doing business in India, that can also promote global services market. E-commerce exports are showing some increasing trend at the moment in India, no doubt about it. So we have seen that online payments, localized delivery, digital marketing, all this is giving us the business to consumer e-commerce market is expected to grow from 5.7 trillion to 8.1 trillion within 4 years, and it is already valued at 83 billion in 2022 and projected to reach 150 billion by 2026. But at the moment, again, globally speaking, India's share is very modest. It was 1.5% in 2022, 2% of global share by 2026. So the e-commerce exports contributed 4 to, ये prelims के point of view से बातें याद रखोगे, 4 to 5 billion in fiscal year 23. But it is expected that if India plays its cards right, they can rise to up to 200 to 300 billion by 2030. But again, we will have to make rules. We will have to liberalize how much commodity you can send abroad. We will have to liberalize the payment mechanisms. If we do that, then this target can easily be achieved. Then, of course, we can talk about factors driving e-commerce growth. So one is rising internet access. That is one factor. Smartphone use has increased. Digital payment system makes it easier, and increasing income levels of people means that online shopping platforms are targeted well. Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, etc. Also, consumers are showing a growing preference for personalized, handcrafted products, where India has a strong tradition due to handloom being established. So e-commerce reduces the intermediary cost, no cost to intermediary, because you don't need many people in the supply chain, and it boosts exporters' margins. सीधा producer consumer को बेचता है, तो बीच में wholesale, retail, इनके gaps देखने को नहीं मिलते. All right, that is the basic idea. Government has also taken its own initiatives like Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, FTP for MSME participation. So again, Niryat Bandhu, this is about giving help to MSME by establishing a nodal officer to promote exports. In fact, Tamil Nadu government has put nodal people in Taiwan. They convince people over there to outsource their shoe production, outsource their cloth production to producers in India. So that's again a very big achievement. Market access initiative, where government will help in achieving market information and then promoting capital goods formation to reach out to larger market, and bank realization certificate electronically given, so payments are streamlined. Then we have dark Niryat Kendras, that is post office networks to be used for export purposes, GST refunds quickly for zero rated supplies, and e-commerce export hubs created connecting artisans, SMEs, and one district, one product producers to global markets. So all this has been done to make sure that small players of India also get globally connected and achieve larger resources. Bharat Mart in Dubai has been established to provide access to Gulf Coordination Council and African markets. So Dubai is becoming the entrepot to North Africa, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, and then North African countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco. So that is again something that is a good beginning point. And again, states like UP and Telangana are also promoting e-commerce through design, packaging, and MSME policy reforms. So this is something that India can keep doing. And once we reach a critical level, this should be a game changer with respect to export possibilities. But as survey correctly says, the regulatory challenges remain. There are ambiguities in roles of sellers versus platform operators, because e-commerce requires collaboration. Low export value limits via courier. सोचिए हम $12,000 या 10 लाख का परमिशन देते हैं कुरियर से एक्सपोर्ट करने को. एक डायमंड 1 करोड़ का होता है. चाइना 4 करोड़ रुपीस देता है, अलाउ करता है कुरियर से एक्सपोर्ट करने को. चाइनीज अलाउ दैट. हम 10 लाख रुपए अलाउ करते हैं. तो आप सोच सकते हैं that what kind of gap exists between us and the Chinese. So that is where we need to change things. Also, lack of distinct custom codes for e-commerce. ट्रेडिशनल एक्सपोर्ट्स के लिए कोड्स हैं, ई-कॉमर्स के लिए अलग कोड्स नहीं है, तो क्लियरेंस में डिले होता है. ऑफिसर्स को कभी कभी खुद ही नहीं पता होता कि एग्जैक्टली कौन सा प्रोडक्ट जा रहा है. सो दिस इज समथिंग वेयर वी नीड टू मेक पीपल एजुकेटेड इन इंडिया. एंड देन फेमा टाइमलाइंस आर रिजिड. सो दे से दैट आपका शिपमेंट हुआ, उसके 9 महीने के अंदर अपना पैसा लेकर वापस आइए. लेकिन ऑनलाइन सेल्स में कभी कभी 1 साल 1.5 साल बाद भी पैसे आते हैं. सो वी नीड टू रिवाइज दैट एंड री इम्पोर्ट रूल्स फॉर रिटर्न्स एंड रिफंड्स. ये कॉम्प्लेक्स है इंडिया में, क्योंकि आपने कुछ पे किया, अब वो वापस आएगा देश में, उसको इंपोर्ट मान लिया जाता है जो वापस आ रहा है, और फिर उस पर ड्यूटी लगा दी जाती है. सो देन इंडियन ई कॉमर्स पीपल बिकम एट डिसएडवांटेज कि सोचिए मैंने ये मान लीजिए प्रोडक्ट बेचा, बाहर के देश में गया, वहाँ किसी को पसंद नहीं आया, उसने वापस किया, अब वो जो मैं वापस ले रहा हूँ उस पर मुझे इंपोर्ट ड्यूटी भी देनी पड़ती है इंडिया में। तो ऐसे अजीब अजीब रूल लेके हम ही रह सकते हैं। Somebody got to put some common sense in North Block, it will help. But unfortunately, that is at premium at the moment. So this, if we can improve, India can again be a hub of e-commerce. क्यों मैं यहाँ insistent हूँ? It's a very new field. इसमें बहुत लोग जागे नहीं हैं अभी. So if India can take an early lead and we have a lot of population and a lot of scaling up possibilities, we have a very good future over here. तो सर्वे सजेस्ट करते हैं क्या क्या करना चाहिए? Streamlining custom processes, redefining regulatory roles and easing compliance can unlock India's e-commerce export potential. Then when we say ease of doing business initiatives for exporters, one is to improve logistics efficiency. ये इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा है, तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एक्सपोर्ट का कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस बढ़ा. Developing logistic hubs, updating infrastructure, national logistics policy, helping, and then paperless e-commerce, EBRC has saved 125 crore annually because the administrative costs have gone away. तो ये एक पॉइंट आपके नोट्स में नहीं है, ये आप ऐड कर लीजिए, बाकी तो मैंने आपको लिखवा रखा है, so you won't have to add anything apart from that. Then of course, it is benefiting the small and e-commerce producers. DGFT has launched the Trade Connect e-platform, a single window portal to connect importer-exporter codes. So that is helping our export promotion councils. Also, they are partnering with Ministry of MSMEs, Exim Bank. That is helping in making sure there is streamlined payment system for MSME. And also there is a mobile app which can offer access to foreign trade policy updates and trade statistics, so that again people can have more information on their handbooks. So that is again something which can help Indian system of exports. Then we come to overall balance of payments. How does India look like? We see current account deficit narrowed to 1.2% of GDP in Q2 from 1.3% in Q2. It's looking quite comfortable. At the moment, our current account deficit is around 1% of GDP. It's looking quite comfortable. India's foreign exchange reserves are high, so there is no danger factor that looks right now over there. The impact of high trade deficit was offset by high services receipts. Also, remittance inflows have been pretty high in India. So India's current account deficit remains relatively contained if we compare it to, say, countries like Brazil and Australia. And if you see, in fiscal year 21, we had current year's account surplus, but that was because imports had declined tremendously due to COVID-imposed lockdowns. Then in 23, our current account deficit had become slightly worrisome here. But overall, if you look at this zone, our current account deficit looks in control. तो अगर आपसे पूछते हैं prelims में, there is current account deficit a challenge in India? The answer is no. Similarly, if we look at current account balance as recent for different countries, we see that India is doing much better compared to many countries. So India at 1.2 looks far better than, say, South Africa, United Kingdom, and so on. But there are some countries with surplus. If you look at Chinese, they have a huge surplus. Germans have a huge surplus. South Koreans have a huge surplus. Japanese have a huge surplus. Russia because of oil. Japan because of its services. South Korea, Germany, and China because of their manufacturing. So the moral of the story is become strong in a particular sector and you will have a current account surplus to a great extent. Now, when we look at capital account, we see that capital inflows have declined in India here. तो अगर आपसे सवाल पूछें what is the condition of capital inflows, it's not doing that great. It was not doing great in fiscal year 21, understandable, due to COVID pandemic. It was becoming negative here. That was again a worrying thing, fiscal year 22. But if you look at 23 and 24, 23 ended Q4 with $89.5 billion of inflow. 24 ended with 25.6. 25 will end, has taken 2 quarters positive, but last 2 quarters were bad, especially the 4th quarter when there was a lot of FPI outflow from India. That kind of capital inflow ko jo isne negative kar diya. We see that net capital inflows surged to $30.5 billion from 12.5 billion. FPI inflows in the first 2 quarters were high, but आपने देखा होगा सितंबर के बाद बहुत massive exit हुआ है इंडिया से. So overall FPI outflow has been positive in India. हमसे बाहर ज़्यादा गए हैं पैसे अंदर आने की जगह portfolio investment में. FDI inflows को अगर देखा जाए तो 2020 अगर हम इसको देखें, gross FDI inflow was $74 billion, repatriation was $18 billion, and gross minus repatriation is the net FDI. कितना रह गया आपके देश में, ऐसे देखा जाता है. अगर हम देखें तो यहाँ हम कंफर्टेबल थे, इट वाज $56 बिलियन, हियर आल्सो इट वाज $55 बिलियन, हियर आल्सो इट वाज 54 बिलियन, $56 बिलियन, $52 बिलियन, यहाँ से कमी आनी शुरू हुई, $27 बिलियन, यहाँ पे $17 बिलियन और यहाँ पे $16 बिलियन. सो there is a lot of outflow also happening from India because of the global uncertainty. तो जो लोग जो प्रॉफिट कमा रहे हैं वो इंडिया से लेके भी वापस जा रहे हैं, इंडिया में री इन्वेस्ट नहीं कर रहे हैं. इसमें भी प्रॉब्लम है, हमने बायलैटरल इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रीटीज को लैप्स कर जाने दिया, हमने FTAs साइन करने में डिले किया, हमने इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज हाई रखी हुई हैं. तो यहाँ अगेन सरकार को थोड़ा चेतावनी है सरकार के लिए, इम्प्रूव द इंटरनल रूल्स, मेक इट ईजियर टू डू बिजनेस इन इंडिया, इंक्रीज द इनफ्लो ऑफ इम्पोर्ट्स टू इंडिया एंड ऑल दैट विल कंट्रोल, I'm all assure some FDI inflow into India. So they said that cumulative FDI crossed, ये important है prelims के point of view से, April 20 से September 24 के बीच में, now we have $1 trillion cumulative FDI that has entered India, and maximum has been in services sector, 19.1% of total equity inflows, that is in software and hardware, trading, non-conventional energy and cement and gypsum. इस टेबल को अच्छे से देख लोगे, it will give you a good idea of how services have received FDI. So India's fundamentals are decent, our fiscal deficit is not high, our inflation levels did not go very high, current account deficit is in control. That all is attracting money, but again if India can make its rules better, if India can make FEMA a little reformed, if India can change its capital gains tax rules, much more foreign inflow can be expected in India. जो इंडिया के हैसियत है उससे कम आ रहा है इंडिया में. अब देखिए gross FDI inflows rose to $55 billion, but net FDI declined sharply to $0.48 billion. We should get worried about this because that is mainly because of people putting their profits, earning it from the stock market, shares being overvalued, and internal taxation rules being bad. Private equity is at 19 billion, which is a good number, to be honest. And for greenfield projects, India is a top destination. ये statement prelims में दे सकते हैं, इस तरह का true or false पूछने को कहेंगे. हाँ, ये देखा गया है कि overall Asian economies themselves are not doing great. So on FDI front, that might be a possibility. So if we see capital inflow बहुत ज़रूरी है क्योंकि हमारा current account deficit में है. अगर FDI, FPI इंडिया में नहीं आए तो हमें borrowings पे निर्भर करना पड़ेगा, which will not be a good idea. So we need to promote FDI and FPI both into India so that capital inflows can compensate for current account deficit that India faces, because globally people are becoming selective. So India will have to enhance FDI attractiveness through greater tax certainty, जिस पर मैं अभी comment कर रहा था, regulatory stability and benchmarking, ease of doing business. This is very important. इसीलिए reinforce reforms, investor friendly policies and seem easy profit repatriation, and then deregulate and ease of doing business to be improved. अगर ये दो key strategies करें तो FDI inflow फिर से pick up करेगा and India will do much better than what we see India doing in the recent past. Then if we see FPIs, again this is not a very important topic, but याद रखना overall there has been a cumulative outflow of FPI from India than inflow. The first 2 quarters looked good this year, but then overall FPIs have done badly. Again in April they have again started coming into India, तो देखो stock market थोड़ा बढ़ने लग गया, but overall FPI has done pretty badly. In the debt segment जो loan लिया है हमने, we see that FPI interest has surged. क्योंकि इंडिया JP Morgan के इमर्जिंग मार्केट बॉन्ड इंडेक्स में इंक्लूड हो गया है, तो एक इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्डाइजेशन हो गई है इंडियन बॉन्ड्स की, इसीलिए अब FPI बॉन्ड्स बहुत खरीद रहे हैं इंडिया में. इट्स अ गुड न्यूज दैट विल अलाउ कॉर्पोरेट्स टू इशू बॉन्ड्स एंड टेक लोन्स फॉर लॉन्ग टर्म रादर देन रिलाइंग ऑन बैंक्स टू गेट लोन्स, बिकॉज दैट विल फ्री द बैंक्स टू गिव लोन्स टू smaller enterprises and give loans to farmers, and corporates will not have to pay back immediately or and so on. So, you know, a good financial structure depends more on bonds, corporate financial system, rather than on banks. Of course, we also see that investments in fully accessible route bonds crossed USD 28 billion. ये positive हो रहा है, no doubt. इंडिया को जब से JP Morgan index में मौका मिला है, हमारे FPI inflows bonds में बढ़ गए हैं. अब इसमें ये भी देखा गया है कि जो इंडिया US 10-year bond yield differential है, you know, वो बढ़ा है. India is giving higher returns than US, so Indian bonds are cheaper than US, and many people are buying Indian bonds compared to US. Plus, the average monthly yield in India has remained around 7%, 6.8%. American yield have been 4%, 3.9%. So automatically, India is giving a higher return, and that's attracting many people. External commercial borrowings and short-term credit have also been flowing in and have given some resilience, because in that case we get easy money and that can be used to pay back for importers, etc. We see that external commercial borrowings have risen sharply, and also we have seen that NRI deposits have surged, but that is majorly because of high interest rate paid by Indian banks in the last 1 year than any other factor. ये interest rate का कमाल है जो Indian banks ने pay किया. हमारे foreign exchange reserves 700 billion क्रॉस कर गए थे, अभी भी 640 billion है. So our foreign exchange reserves have done very well for themselves. They are covering almost 90% of India's external debt, and they provide import cover of 10.9 months, far exceeding IMF's 3 months. हमारा जो short term loan है वो मुश्किल से $110 billion है. Our foreign exchange reserves are more than sufficient. मैं कल ही किसी दोस्त से मजाक कर रहा था, पाकिस्तान से हैं, थोड़े पंगे ले रहे थे व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप पे. उन्होंने कहा हम लोग लड़ाई को तैयार हैं. मैंने कहा पहले भुखमरी से लड़ दो अपने देश में, भीख मांगने से लड़ लो. $8 बिलियन IMF नहीं दे रहा, थोड़ा हमें प्लीज रखोगे तो शायद 15-20 बिलियन डॉलर डाल दे तुम्हारी झोली में, क्योंकि हमारे पास $640 बिलियन है. तो मुझे लगता है दैट कंट्रीज डू वेल व्हेन दे आर वेल्दी. इंडिया में भी बहुत लोगों को ये अकल नहीं है, अभी भी लोग ये मार दूंगा उसको फोड़ दूंगा ऐसी बातें करते हैं. बट वेल्दी होइए, रिच होइए. आज देखिए चाइना रिच है तो ट्रंप ने उन पर टैरिफ लगाया और उन्हें पलट के टैरिफ लगा दिया. अमीर होने में देश को ध्यान लगाना चाहिए, अपने लोगों को पढ़ाइए लिखाइए, केपेबल बनाइए, एंड दैट ऑटोमेटिकली विल रिफ्लेक्ट इन हायर इन्वेस्टमेंट्स फ्रॉम फॉरेन, ऑटोमेटिकली विल रिफ्लेक्ट इन बेटर एक्सपोर्ट कैपेसिटी. ह्यूमंस मेक द कंट्री, कंट्री डजंट मेक द ह्यूमंस. अपने देश के लोगों को अगर हम स्ट्रांग बना दें, जो लोग नीचे फंसे हुए हैं, जिनको पढ़ाई अच्छी नहीं मिल रही, हेल्थ केयर अच्छा नहीं मिल रहा, ये भी सुधरेगा वहां से. पाकिस्तान ने इन पे ध्यान नहीं दिया, उनका बिगेस्ट एक्सपोर्ट टेररिज्म है, उसके पैसे नहीं मिलते, तो इसीलिए वो बेचारे स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं. Thankfully, India is not in that quagmire, but that is something we should learn at times. Anyways, the foreign exchange reserves in the first half of 25 have risen. तो आप देखिए इसका कारण रहा है BOP surplus and valuation gain. Valuation gain because जब डॉलर अप्रिशिएट करेगा तो हमारे फॉरेक्स रिजर्व्स बढ़ जाते हैं, क्योंकि वो डॉलर टर्म्स में है. तो हमेशा ध्यान रखोगे, अगर प्रिलिम्स में क्वेश्चन आया, इफ डॉलर अप्रिशिएट्स व्हाट विल हैपन टू फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व्स? राइजेस. डिप्रिशिएट्स, फॉल्स. Of course, now India is now ranked 4th globally in forex reserves behind China, Japan and Switzerland. Switzerland has high forex reserves because सब लोग अपना पैसा स्विट्जरलैंड में रखते हैं. Japanese are huge savers and Chinese have a huge trade surplus. So India is also now becoming one of the largest forex reserves people in the world. This is about, looking at how the balance of payment has overall, or foreign exchange reserves have overall looked like. So of course the foreign currency assets are the biggest ones, which is a good thing. But you see the rising share of gold. यहाँ आते आते आप देखेंगे गोल्ड बढ़ने लग गया, क्योंकि अनसर्टेनिटी के वजह से RBI उसे कनेक्ट करने लगे. Reverse tranche position and SDR of IMF have also been small part of total reserves. एक इंस्टीट्यूट ने अपने क्वेश्चन पेपर में गलत लिख दिया था कि रिवर्स ट्रांच पोजीशन इज नॉट अ पार्ट ऑफ ए फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व. ये सर्वे का पेज है, अगर सरकार इसे लिख रहे हैं तो कोई कंफ्यूजन नहीं. रिवर्स ट्रांच पोजीशन इज वेरी मच अ पार्ट ऑफ फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व. देन इफ वी सी, so now with global uncertainty, central banks in emerging markets are diversifying reserves, which I told you gold holdings surge कर रहे हैं, इसीलिए गोल्ड का प्राइस भी बढ़ रहा है मार्केट में. साथ में डॉलर के डिक्लाइन की वजह से लोग यूरो होल्ड कर रहे हैं, येन होल्ड कर रहे हैं, अदर करेंसीज लाइक दिनार होल्ड कर रहे हैं, मलेशियन रिंगिट होल्ड कर रहे हैं, इंडियन रूपी भी होल्ड कर रहे हैं. सो देयर इज अ डाइवर्सिफिकेशन एंड यूज ऑफ मोर नॉन ट्रेडिशनल करेंसी. Exchange rate fund, the Indian rupee has been market determined, and we see that it has gone down in the recent past. But then the INR depreciation has been far better than some other emerging market countries, as you see here. These countries have done worse than what Indian national rupee has done. And this depreciation was largely because of people investing more in US after Trump, because Trump talked about tariffs, so people always looked for a safer bargain and they looked towards the US. So now that looks better. We see ourselves in a better place there. and nominal effective exchange rate remained stable and real effective exchange rate appreciated because our inflation was not as high as compared to other countries. तो इसीलिए हमारा रीर अभी भी 107 पर है, जिसको लेकर हमें थोड़ी चिंता करनी चाहिए. We should let REER come to 100 if not 99 so that our products become competitive and we can gain larger from the world. Then if we see our external debt position, we see that it is 19.4% of GDP, debt to GDP, which is a very controlled thing. इसमें भी सरकार का debt बहुत कम है. Indian government debt is hardly 3.5%. It's mostly private debt. So the major part is private debt, then government debt, and overall debt is also less than 20% of GDP. Less to get worried about. Total debt 90% forex reserve we have, and as I said, sovereign debt is very low. भारत के सरकार का exposure कम है. That's good news for India. We don't have to get worried about it. इसमें हमें नॉर्थ ब्लॉक की प्रशंसा करनी चाहिए क्योंकि ग्लोबल मार्केट बहुत वॉलेटाइल रहे हैं एंड नॉर्मली इफ यू डोंट मैनेज योर डेट वेल that may become a problem. So fiscal, financial, Ministry of Finance and RBI have come together very well to manage this situation. Also, we see that the short-term debt has declined marginally and its ratio to forex reserve is only 18.9%. So indicating reduced rollover risk. Rollover risk होता है कि मान लीजिए मैंने बॉन्ड इशू किया 1 साल के लिए, 8 महीने के लिए. अब मान लीजिए मैं अभी पैसे नहीं देना चाहता तो मैं कहता हूं कि बॉन्ड को रोल ओवर कर दो, मुझे 6 महीने और दे दो, ये बॉन्ड फिर से खरीद लो. अगर वो नहीं खरीदने को तैयार हुए तो रोल ओवर रिस्क हो गया. अब आपको पैसे इमीडिएटली देने पड़ेंगे. तो हमारे पास जितना शॉर्ट टर्म डेट है उसके 5 टाइम्स ज्यादा फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व है. सो देयर इज नो रोल ओवर रिस्क, वी कैन इजीली पे बैक. The debt is predominantly in US dollar from Prem's point of view. Keep that in mind. Followed by Indian national rupee, which is again a very good news. रूपी टर्म्स में डेट है, कभी भी अगर वर्स्ट सिचुएशन भी आया तो पैसा छाप के दे देंगे लोगों को. इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ेगा हमारे देश में, बट दिस इज व्हाट वी कैन हैव इन हैंड. सो इंडिया लुक्स प्रिटी कंफर्टेबल राइट नाउ. आवर फॉरेन डेट्स आर वेरी मच इन कंट्रोल. सो ओवरऑल वी आर इन अ गुड शेप दैट प्लेस. सो वी सी इंडियाज डेट सिचुएशन इज स्टेबल overall. The outlook survey says its external sector has shown resilience even though geopolitical challenges have remained. Global trade shifting towards protectionism and uncertainty. So for India, we should have a new strategic trade roadmap, diversify the market, diversify the commodities, make new friends, put money in new types of currency. All that will help India quite a bit. Enhance export competitiveness, lower trade costs, better facilitation, improve ease of doing business, do structural reforms. Maximum important things are those. And become a part of global supply chain, that's equally important. Also, efficient governance and productive private sector efforts can help India expand its global market share and sustain higher income growth. Thank you all for being connected. I hope to now see you on Monday. We have finished almost major chapters of survey. I will see you on Monday to meet for the next chapter discussion. All the best. Keep preparing well. Bye bye all of you. Thank you.